The government's ultimatum to Twitter, a final order to comply because there is still no details on the chief compliance officer. This is what the government is saying. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology in its letter to Twitter has gone on to say, and we'd like to quote, that is dismayed to note that Twitter responses to the ministry letters neither addresses the clarification sought by the ministry nor indicates a full compliance with the rules. So the government of India has now made it clear, it's a final ultimatum to Twitter that they need to comply with the rules of working in India, because there are still no details as far as a chief compliance officer from Twitter is concerned. Let's try and get more details. Maria is now joining us. So Maria, the government in no mood for any more extensions is in a way giving an ultimatum to Twitter because they still have no clarification of all the rules and regulations that had been asked by the social media sites and microblogging sites like Twitter to comply with.
Yes, that's right. And because it's only Twitter which has taken this path of defiance, now the government of India writing another letter to Twitter head office in United States and is sending very clearly, and in fact it says, and I'm reading the content of this letter, it says, it is clear from your responses that till date Twitter has not informed about the details of the chief compliance officer as required under the rules. Further, resident grievance officer and nodal contact of person nominated by you is not an employee of Twitter India as per the rules, and the office address of Twitter India is essential again, which has not been provided to the government. What is important to highlight here is, Ridhima, that but for Twitter, all other social media giants, including Instagram, including Facebook, and LinkedIn and others, have given all the details to the government, but Twitter has taken this path. I'm looking at another paragraph in this letter. The government says that the people of India who use the Twitter as a platform deserve and demand a fair mechanism to address their grievances and resolve their dispute. Users who are abused on the platform or are harassed or are subject to defamation or sexual abuse or become victims or a whole range of other abusive content must get a redressal mechanism that the people of India have created through a process of law. The question that the government wants from Twitter is not asking for too much, because it's the intermediary that is functioning in India who has to be made accountable. The government is saying, do business in India, but you have to comply with the law of the land. And the law of the land says, follow 3 points. Appoint a nodal contact person, give us the details. Appoint a chief compliance officer, give the details. And appoint a resident grievance officer and tell the details to the government of India. So far, Twitter has taken this path that they will not be doing anything like that. Then the government says, I'm looking at the final paragraph here, Ridhima, however, as gesture of goodwill, Twitter Inc. is hereby given one last notice to immediately comply with the rules. So this is the final notice that has been given to Twitter, failing which the exemption which is being given from liability available under Section 79 of the IT Act 2000 shall stand withdrawn, and Twitter shall be liable for the consequences as per the IT Act and other penal laws of India.
Maria, I want to understand what's happening as far as Twitter is concerned, because, when these IT rules were first notified way back in February, the government was very, very flexible, and they said, we're giving you a period of 3 months, so you have enough time to talk to your head office, in the United States, so on and so forth, and then get back to us. But after the 3-month deadline, was complete and the social media giants hadn't complied, even after that, the government was ready to give some sort of a flexibility for these social media giants to work a way around. But what are you picking up from your sources? If you've been able to speak to somebody from Twitter, what really is the reason that is creating this friction between both the parties?
Well, I think it is defiance of Twitter, which is continuing. If all other social media platforms can comply with the rule of the land, then what is stopping Twitter from doing so? What is the government asking for, Ridhima? Let's be clear about certain points being raised here. The government says, appoint a grievance officer. That's not asking for too much. If there are some people in India who have been abused on this platform, if the nature of this platform is such that it is being misused by some people, in putting out some defamatory content. So the government says that seeking redressal is the right of an Indian citizen, and you are an intermediary. You cannot sit in judgment over content.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be striking it off if concerns are raised. And of course, everything started with the decision that was taken by Twitter when it got drawn in what was clearly a political war of words playing out between the ruling government and the Congress party, in which they struck off the entire toolkit, which was put out by several ministers and also BJP spokesperson.
Okay, Maria, we'll leave the conversation there. We also have with us cyber law expert Pawan Duggal also joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Duggal, good afternoon. Good to have you on the broadcast with us. Talk to us about how do you see this, defiance, if one may say, by Twitter. You do have other social media platforms that have complied, and there's a lot at stake, because once that intermediary status is taken, then you do have a lot of legal liabilities as well.
Clearly, if your intermediary status is going to be taken, it's going to be a massive blow to you, because till now, as a company, you got a soft glove approach in the country. You've seen that you have been actually given in a very special privileged position where you are shielded from all kinds of liability thanks to Section 79 of the IT Act. But now, if they are not complying with the IT Rules 2021, or if their statutory exemption is taken out, then I think they should be ready for a Pandora's box of new litigations and criminal complaints. And I think therefore, this trying to ensure that they retain their statutory exemption should be one of the topmost priorities for any kind of intermediary. They also have to realize that they will be playing with fire if they do not really comply with the IT Act and also the IT Rules 2021, because then there is criminal liability that's going to be coming on the said company and its top management. So I think they will have to be very studious, very careful, and very due diligent in trying to ensure that their activities are coming within the limited parameters of an independent third-party service provider or as an intermediary, where they do not play any active role in the publication, dissemination of any content which is in violation of the law.
Sir, I also want to understand, India is one of the biggest markets for all these players. So if you want to have business in India, you need to comply with the rules of the land as well. Now, for the longest time, Twitter has been saying that there is a COVID-19 pandemic. We're trying to get in touch with our headquarters and, we haven't got the communication in the order. Do you just think these are delaying tactics, and if they had to comply, they would have complied already?
I think they are doing this deliberately and consciously, knowing fully well that if they could get away with suspending or terminating the account of a sitting U.S. president, they somehow get a feeling that they're above the process of law. What they're not realizing is that Indian law is a different ballgame altogether, and the Indian law is going to be very slow, but once it gets moving, it's going to come to your throat. So very quickly, if you don't really comply with the law, in any case, by virtue of Rule 7 of the IT Rules 2021, you have already forfeited your statutory exemption from legal liability, because you're yourself saying that you've not complied with the law. That being so, you're also opening yourself to criminal prosecution. Now, whether criminal prosecution will take place or not will be dependent on the political will of the government and how far it wants to go forward in trying to give a deterrent message to these concerned service providers.
Right. Sir, I request you to stay on with us. We also have BJP's Gaurav Bhatia also now joining us. Gaurav, how do you see this? This is the question that I was asking Pawan Duggal also, that if Twitter had to comply so far, it already would have. Do you just think they are now indulging themselves in delaying tactics, and this is a stand that has been taken by Twitter that they refuse to comply?
It doesn't matter what Twitter wants to say, but it surely matters what law of the country says, and Twitter is not above law in India. Law will catch up, and as Pawan Duggal ji, my dear friend, was saying, Twitter will have to face the consequences of violating the law of our country. And I'm sure that the strong government will ensure that Twitter is made liable for not complying with the rules of 2021, as Twitter is only a private entity, whereas law of the country reflects the will of the people, and they have to abide by what the Constitution, the IT Act, and the rules of 2021 say.
Gaurav, I also want to understand, what do you think about as far as the policy functions of Twitter are concerned? Because so far they've said that, we're waiting for communication or orders from the high up order, but their policy in India also has been in a bit of a grey area. For example, what we've seen today, you remove the blue badge of the vice president's account, and then there is a conversation. They say that it's a policy matter, but then it's re-given and re-verified. So do you then think there is a grey area in their policy itself?
Let me make it very clear and for the viewers to understand. Their policy is subservient to the Constitution, then to the IT Act, and then to the rules. And in no way can they refuse to comply with what the IT rules stipulate. And if there is a responsibility on the company to follow those, have a grievance redressal mechanism, have, responsible people ensuring that grievances of the citizens of the country are heard and redressed, they cannot refuse to not comply with these rules. And thus, all their policies have to be in conformity with what the law of the country says.
Okay, Gaurav Bhatia as well as Pavan Dugal, we'll leave the conversation there. We'll continue to track all those developments.